I'm Nancy Wyland. I work for the Environmental Health Sciences Research Center at the University of Iowa. I'm the center administrator, but also have worked in community engagement in the past. And I was drawn into developing this protocol with our center director earlier last year, driven by the NIEHS initiative to address disaster response in terms of research. So the two of us sat down. Peter Thorne is our center director, and it took us about a year from start to finish. We started developing this protocol based on a couple of things. So realized that early on about the time sensitive disaster-related research, because we had a couple of major events here in the Midwest. In 2008, we had a flood that really devastated the state and much of this Midwestern area. And the flood event occurred in June, and we had tried to get out into the field to conduct research, but didn't have IRB approval until November. So that's a 6-month lag in which we would have liked to have been present for the demolition of some of the houses, to collect air samples, that sort of thing. But because of delays in the IRB approval, we were not able to do that. Same thing with a landfill fire that we had a few years ago. This fire burned for weeks and weeks and weeks, and you can see it was pretty bad smoke in the air. A lot of people exposed, but we couldn't get into the field right away. And by the time we had approval to do studies, it was done. It was behind us. So these two events, among others, were the impetus for us pursuing our own emergency response IRB approval. So we contacted our IRB, and they were excited about this. It was fairly innovative. They'd been hearing about disaster response research, and were anxious to get in on the ground floor and help us, and they worked with us over the course of the year. So one of the things we had to consider in the beginning, as an NIEHS course center, what is our center focus and our expertise? Well, being in Iowa, we work mostly with rural and agricultural populations, and the contaminants that are generated by things like large industrialized livestock facilities. We've always specialized in pulmonary research and respiratory risks in the environment, and just recently we've moved toward water quality. This was because of a survey that we conducted across the state and learned that water quality is the top issue for the people of Iowa. There are all kinds of disasters, and in Iowa we won't be facing any hurricanes, I hope. Coastal oil spills, you know, those things that are on a large scale. So our IRB protocol was designed to address our population and our expertise. So some of the considerations that we had to think about was what kinds of things do we want to study in the environment. In the event of a flood, there would be mold, chemicals, fecal contamination, both from sanitary sewers, or not sanitary sewers, but combined sewers, and also the large number of CAFOs here in Iowa. In fire, we may want to study particulate matter, airborne chemicals, and then to identify the region and population for study, we decided to work with the county health departments to identify who was living in the affected areas. And we haven't piloted this yet, but we have used this method in the past to sort of build our research study population. We would interview them either in their homes or try to track them down at shelters, depending on the nature of the disaster. Then we developed telephone screening, consent, and survey materials as usual, but we did this building upon previously used materials for similar studies, the flood of 2008 being one of them. We decided which I say we loosely, it was mostly Peter Thorne, he's the science end of this, but decided which human tissue and fluid samples would be the best for collecting for biomarker research. And then one of the most important things is establishing the disaster response checklist. So our goal in creating this document was to make it somewhat comprehensive and at the same time fluid so that it could be manipulated and changed. This is some of the language that we actually took from the RAPID study. That I would recommend, if you're going to pursue something like this, to really go through that document, because we found a lot of very useful things that sort of take a very diverse issue and boil it down to, we're talking about a disaster basically, and this is what we want to do in the event of a disaster. And then the specifics come later in the checklist. So I'm including sections of the checklist in this presentation because I think it's really an important document. So at the time, say we have a landfill fire today, we apply to with our open IRB disaster response protocol. We include an abstract that describes the event. Landfill fire occurred on March 19th, 2018, and this is what we want to do. And then we go through a list of potential disasters, and if it's something else, obviously you can fill that in. But the abstract is important because it will describe, this is what we plan to do, this is the nature of the disaster, and then all of this was taken from the RAPID protocol. Basic information about it, where is the research taking place, how many people do you want to study. We estimated high, we estimated 200, which is high for this area, but hoping that we would be able to encompass the population in that number, and how long we intend to recruit people, and then what kinds of procedures are possible. So even in the language in the consent document, it says we may want to take some samples from you, which could include blood or buccal cell or conducting lung function tests. And then within the consent document underneath, there's a checkbox, much like this, that indicates which ones we want to do. And then the questionnaires, we, as I said, took those from previous studies and modified them to some degree to make them a little more generic. And then finally, there's a list of what kinds of physical health issues are we specifically interested in, and you can see the list here. And then the other two questions were part of the RAPID protocol. So as I indicated, this is the first protocol of its kind, at least on our campus, but a year ago they had at least heard about disaster response and wanted to get on board. They were very enthusiastic, and I would encourage you to talk to your IRB because I think they see that this is a need. This is an open approval, and it can be renewed annually. We only had a handful of questions from the IRB to resolve, but they seem to understand its purpose and how it worked. And then, as I said, if we had an event today, we would apply for approval, and within 24 hours, our IRB said they would give us approval. And we have about 60-odd investigators in our center, and we've put out the notice to them that this is available to all of them if they're interested in pursuing some kind of disaster response research. Again, we haven't piloted this, but it's ready to go.